everybody, coming to you from our Bolingbrook campus. I love the people of the Bolingbrook campus. I love everybody at the South Naperville, Wheaton, all of you who are participating online. Welcome to the Compass Church. And welcome to week 5, the last week of our series entitled Out of the Ashes, where we've learned about biblical resiliency from Jephthah. I love this guy, Jephthah. He has taught us so much. You know, Jephthah was a guy who was pushed down, but bounced back. Pushed down by his own family, rejected by his brothers, because he was the son of a prostitute. Banished out of the land to a fringe community called the land of Tob, where he connected with a bunch of social misfits. But he loved them, and he led them, and he demonstrated himself to be an extraordinary leader, so good, in fact, that eventually his people of Israel called upon him to come and be their leader, their commander, or their judge. And as a result, Jephthah rose up to the top position in the nation, and he led the Israelites, technically Gilead, the Transjordan part of Israel, he led them to victory over the Ammonites, their arch nemesis, an incredible victory. In the first 3 weeks of this series, we saw 3 ways that we should emulate Jephthah, 3 ways that he was really showing us the right way. But the last 2 weeks of the series, we're learning from Jephthah's failure. Remember last week? Oh, was that ugly? Here, Jephthah wanting to do something heroic for God, wanting to give God a gift that shows his true devotion. He entered into the practice of human sacrifice, which isn't what God wanted at all. And we studied together that it's great to want to do something bold and amazing for the Lord, but you better understand what it is that he's looking for. This week, in this final week, we're going to look at Jephthah's pride. Unfortunately, arrogance characterizes this man of faith, and we're going to see that we must be a humble people. Today's message is entitled Humble. And so let's talk, shall we, about pride. Do you have any? I do. I will readily admit that one of the many character flaws in me is arrogance, a battle with this thing called pride. And interestingly, my battle with pride is even maybe more evident these days to me as we've been utilizing this online video form of ministry. I didn't anticipate that, but I'll just share with you how it happens. Just this week, I bumped into a family from our church out and about. I love meeting folks from the Compass Church as I'm out and about. And this was kind of an unusual meet because they've never attended any of our in-person 4 campuses. Through this pandemic, they've joined our church online. And as a result, I had never met them, and I was very excited to meet them. It turns out they were excited to meet me, and they made a comment. They said, "Oh, we feel kind of nervous." They said, "Jeff, to us, you're kind of a movie star." A movie star? Clearly I'm not. But I realized if they want to view me as a movie star, I'm okay with that. And that little comment, just illuminated in my heart just a little bit of pride. And so, movie star, yeah. This video teaching has shown my pride in another way, too. Here, again, a guy from our church who I bumped into this week, and he, it turns out, has not been in person because of health concerns, and he informed me that he's not been attending online either. He said, "Jeff, I've been going to church via the internet, just not the Compass Church." He said, "If I have to watch online," he said, "I realized that gives me opportunity to listen to any preacher I want." And he said, "With that, I realized might as well watch one who's really good at it." Yeah. All of a sudden, I'm like, wow, that stung a little bit, huh? Yeah. In his choosing to upgrade to a different preacher, I found my pride wounded again and exposed again. Now, I'm being vulnerable here, but I know you struggle as well. We all battle pride, and we need the wisdom that Jephthah's story can bring us. So let's look at pride, shall we, as a sickness, as a disease. And since we're going to use that metaphor, I think it'd be best that we transition just down the hall to the Bolingbrook Christian Medical Center. Come on. You know, we are so privileged to be in ministry partnership with the Bolingbrook Christian Health Clinic. We help by providing their office space at our Bolingbrook campus. They've got extensive space where they have 5 patient rooms like this and a team of volunteer doctors and nurses who give some of their time each week to care for the under-resourced people in this community. In fact, I wonder if some of you are doctors and nurses, and God might nudge you to join this team of loving Christ followers. The Bolingbrook Christian Health Clinic was founded by a friend, actually roommate of my wife's 17 years ago, and brings the love of Jesus to people in such a tangible, meaningful way. I just see God's smile on all that goes on here. I was pre-med back in college, and so medicine just fascinates me. It's obviously well-equipped. In fact, look what I noticed. Q-tips. You say, well, why Q-tips? What's the importance of them? Well, you may not know this, but this is what they use to test for COVID. Have you heard the stories? I guess they take these babies, it's a horror story from some who have conveyed it to me. And though the Q-tip doesn't look very long, they stick the whole thing, length of it, up your nose to do a test. Well, I hope you never have to take that dreaded COVID-19 test. Friends, we're in this doctor's office because we want to talk about pride as a sickness, as a virus. And it's interesting, when it comes to COVID-19, they talk a lot about how did you get it? Contact tracing, figuring out the origin of the sickness. When it comes to pride, what's the origin of the sickness? It's interesting. In the case of Jephthah, we can see how it developed in him. It all started innocently with courage. Courage is a good thing. But Jephthah had courage in the Lord. He said, you know what? I'm going to courageously lead. I'm going to courageously be willing to go to battle. And courage was a strength in him. But courage plus experience often leads to confidence. Jephthah was very confident in his leadership. Now, I hope it was confidence in the Lord and not confidence in him. We have reason to suspect that it was the good kind of confidence in God. But sometimes courage that leads to confidence eventually leads to being conceited, proud. And that's what it was with Jephthah. After beating the Ammonites, the historic enemy here of the Israelites, he was so delighted in the great victory his leadership brought about that he fell into that courage to confidence to conceited pathway. And he got proud. And it's so sad how some people start humble, but as they have some success in life, as they have some experience in life, a conceit is born that is just so ugly. And so we can see the progress that could lead to pride in our lives. The second thing we're going to do in this message, we're going to look at what are the symptoms of pride. When it comes to COVID-19, we hear all about the symptoms. The doctor in this office would ask, do you have any symptoms? What are the most popular symptoms? You know them. A fever, a loss of taste and smell. Have you heard that? And a cough. Friends, those 3 symptoms, fever, loss of taste and smell, and cough, we're going to make a parallel of those 3 symptoms to the 3 symptoms of pride displayed in Jephthah's life. As we're about to see, though pride is invisible like a virus, Jephthah manifested or expressed his pride in 3 symptoms that are so ugly and unfortunate, and they happen to us as well. Lastly, we're going to transition to treatment. The great thing about any sickness is that a doctor can help. And so can the great physician, our Lord, help with the sickness of pride. We're going to discover the medicine, the treatment that can slow down the spread, if not entirely remove, ugly pride and bringing about beautiful health, also known as humility. So we see Jephthah's pride being demonstrated in Judges chapter 12, verse 1. Maybe we could call this a symptom, an expression of his pride. Here's what we read. The Ephraimites said to Jephthah, "Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you?" Now, Ephraim was one of the prominent tribes on the west side of the Jordan River, and they could not believe that Gilead, the three tribes on the east side, would declare war and go to fight without the tribes on the west. I suppose that would be like Texas declaring war without including the rest of the United States. I mean, it was just unthinkable from their perspective. Look at Jephthah's response in verse 2. Jephthah answered, "Although I called, you didn't save me out of their hands. And when I saw that you wouldn't help, I took my life in my hands and crossed over to fight the Ammonites." Jephthah claims, I did call, I did ask, but he did not. We have the account in the previous chapter of what happened, and Jephthah's making it up. He's denying his failure. I did call you, but he did not. What do we have going on here? Friends, we have a man who is incapable of admitting his failure. He should have asked the other tribes. They were one nation, and they needed to be together in this moment. But Jephthah, as a young leader, Jephthah without much relational connection, he never turned to the tribes on the west side. And pride stops us from admitting our failure. Let me just phrase it this way. One symptom of pride is the inability to admit failure. You know, the symptom of COVID that comes to mind is the inability to smell or to taste. You know, you might be preparing a meal with COVID-19, and your meal may be a colossal failure, just disgusting. And yet you put it in your mouth and you can't see the repulsive flavors or taste them. And so you're blind to the failure that's within. Similarly, people who are proud seem to be blind to their own failure. They lack a sense of self-awareness, and they very rarely can articulate and admit that they've really blown it. Do you have this symptom of pride, an inability to admit failure? Here, let me just ask it this way. When was the last time you said you were wrong? I mean, not realized you were wrong, said it. How often do the words, you know what, you're right, I was wrong? When's the last time that came out of your mouth? Friends, full admission of failure avoids minimizing it. Sometimes we're like, yeah, I guess I did that, but we're trying to downplay the significance of our error. True humility is expressed when you're like, you know what? That's terrible, what I did. Don't minimize it. Don't justify it. Don't do the, yeah, I guess, but. No. Humble admission of failure has no minimizing, no justifying, and there's remorse involved, where you say, I failed. That is ugly. I regret, there's the remorse. I regret that. In fact, would you forgive me? Friends, I've found in life that there are two types of people, those who can robustly admit their failure and those who never will. Those who refuse to see it, those who refuse to say it, those who refuse to repent of it. And so often, those people who just can't verbalize, man, I am sorry, I failed. It's pride. Pride welling up. It stops them from that humbling expression called repentance. So that was the case of Jephthah. He had blown it, and yet he couldn't bring himself to say it. There's one, the inability to admit failure. The second is the inability to overlook insult. The Gileadites are now insulted by the Ephraimites. Let me read. This is chapter 12, verse 4. Jephthah then called together the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. This is a civil war. These are tribes within the nation of Israel. The Gileadites, that's Jephthah's people, they struck them down because the Ephraimites had said, "You Gileadites are renegades." You know the term renegade, that's a name calling. It's an insult. It means you're a turncoat, you're a deserter. Not only are they being insulted, they're being criticized. And with Jephthah and his men, this was too much. They were not going to put up with being called a name. Isn't that interesting? One of the expressions or symptoms of pride is this inability to overlook insult. They're like, "How dare you call me that?" Friends, this reminds me of the COVID symptom of coughing. What is coughing? Coughing is when there's an irritation in your lungs and there's an uncontrollable and violent reaction to that irritation. Similarly, when people say things that irritate you, are you able to just overlook, or do you uncontrollably and violently react to what they've said? This is the second symptom, this inability to overlook insult. One of the ways I see it manifest in our culture today is with the trash talking going on in baseball. Just this week, I was reading about a verbal confrontation between the Padres and the Dodgers in the playoffs here. And it's happening more this year in baseball than any year before because there are no fans in the stands. This pandemic has resulted with baseball players being able to hear the insults launched from one dugout to the other. You know, the sound of the crowd in previous years would have drowned out that verbal exchange. But these days, they're saying things. And it starts off small. There'll be a little criticism, nice job, buddy. Followed by a criticism back, followed by, a name, followed by a more profane name, followed by, it escalates. And it's happening a lot in baseball, and it's happening a lot in relationships in our lives, where someone says something that's critical of us, maybe insulting of us. Are you able to let that slide? People who are humble, they just can let it slide. People who are arrogant, who struggle with pride, they rise up and they're like, "You know what? Who are you to say that about me?" And they can't let it go. In marriages, in families, in workplace, these harsh statements just escalate, and prideful people are unable to just overlook insult. Like water off a duck's back. We should just be able to let it go. Doesn't matter. I'm not playing that game. And the third symptom of Jephthah's pride is found in Judges 12, verse 5. This is after the Gileadites, Jephthah's army, has defeated the Ephraimites, and the Ephraimites are they're defeated with their tail between their legs. They're trying to go back to Ephraim on the west side of the river. It says in verse 5, the Gileadites captured the ford of the Jordan. I should clarify that a ford is a term for a shallow place in a river where people can wade across the river. They didn't have bridges over the Jordan River, and so these shallow places were very strategic. It's like having control of the bridge. It says the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim, and whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead asked him, "Are you an Ephraimite? Are you one of the enemy? Are you one of the defeated foes?" Verse 6, if he replied, No, they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." The term Shibboleth simply means an ear of corn. If he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him. Apparently, some of the defeated Ephraimites were trying to sneak back to their homeland. They just want to get back. They're humiliated, defeated. But Jephthah and his men would not allow any of the defeated soldiers to return. In fact, if they even tried to sneak in saying, I'm not an Ephraimite, they used their inability to pronounce this sound. It would be like me trying to roll my R's. I just can't do it, and my non-Spanish speaking, identity would be revealed by my inability to make that sound. Well, they tested him with this word. And if they couldn't say it right, they're like, you're an Ephraimite. And they killed him. Jephthah was merciless. He's slaughtering by the thousands his own brothers, fellow Israelites. What's going on here? Why this ruthlessness? You can say it this way. This is the third symptom of pride, the inability to show mercy. Humble people show mercy. Prideful people tend to be just ruthless, and Jephthah was in this case, and he just slaughtered his own brothers, the defeated foes, instead of showing them mercy. The COVID symptom that comes to mind is the fever, a hot head. And that's the case with people who've got pride. They're hot-headed, and they tend to be ruthless. And if someone wrongs them, they're going to show vengeance and give it back. Folks, I would ask you, if you've been wronged, if you realize someone owes you, are you able to just show them mercy? Or do you find yourself saying, no, they're not going to get out of this that easy? That's often a sign of pride. An example in my life that comes to mind, I really failed somebody. I was officiating a wedding, and I got a call on the day of the reception saying, where are you? I had put the wedding reception into my calendar with the wrong time. And here the entire wedding party and family had been waiting at the place of the reception for an hour. People had left work early to get there on time. People had traveled from far distant lands to be there. And they had been standing around waiting for the pastor for an hour. I felt so bad. I drove like crazy. And when I arrived, I kind of walked in feeling like everyone was glaring at me. You dirtbag, how could you waste our time? I saw the groom and I approached him and I'm like, dude, I am so sorry. And I'll never forget his response. He's like, Jeff, don't worry about it. We all make mistakes. No biggie, you're good. And his mercy extended to me was so beautiful, and I believe revealed a humility in him. He's like, hey, listen, you made a mistake. I make mistakes. We all make mistakes. In other words, he saw himself as a failure himself. Humble people give mercy because they know they've needed mercy. People who've received mercy tend to give mercy. And if you view yourself as a fellow sinner, hey, I'm just going to show mercy because I've received mercy. It reminds me of Jesus in the parable of the unmerciful servant. In that parable, Jesus describes a guy who was forgiven a huge debt and then beat up someone who owed him a few bucks. Jesus is like, come on, people. God has shown you so much mercy. Should you not have the humility to extend mercy to others? And so if you can say, hey, friend who's wronged you or offended you or hurt you, listen, I forgive you. It's in the past. God has forgiven me so much. I'm just a humble, forgiven sinner myself. And so, yeah, I'll show you mercy. Humility, humble people, they show mercy. Prideful, how dare you treat me like that? Arrogant people tend to not show mercy. So there you go. The three symptoms of pride expressed in Jephthah's life. The inability to admit failure, the inability to overlook insult, and the inability to show mercy. May we demonstrate increasingly none of those because we're truly humble. Now, let's get to the remedy. What is the treatment? How do we get humble? And interestingly, the guidance can be found in what we discovered last week. Do you remember in the prophet Micah's words? He challenged people in a sense, love people and love God. Jesus said those are the two most important commandments. Love God and love people. And I have discovered that's the remedy to get us humble. That's how you overcome pride. Listen, if you love God like crazy, if you are so enamored with how great He is, you're not impressed with how great you are. That's the key. Again, humility is not looking down on yourself saying, I'm terrible. Humility, rather, is being so in love with God, so mesmerized by His greatness, His goodness, that's what impresses you, Him. So you love God and then love people. When you really love people, the focus of your life is not self. It's about others. I just want to be a blessing and serve others. You're outwardly focused rather than inwardly consumed. And so you want to get humble, love God, be impressed with Him. Love people, be outwardly focused on serving them. That's the key to a humble heart. Now let me warn you, if you don't take these steps to get humble, one of the dangers is God may make you humble. In fact, we find in the book of Daniel that those who walk in pride, He, God, is able to humble. In other words, if you don't get humble by your own initiative, look out. God may humble you by humiliating circumstances. You know who comes to mind is a new friend of mine. Paul Gersh is one of the pastors at our Naperville campus who joined us a year ago. And Paul has an amazing story of his own pride and God's humbling of him. Paul was an incredible athlete. I mean, he was a rock star back in high school and college. He was the top athlete in baseball, golf, hockey. Here's a little bit of Paul's story.
I did end up going to Illinois State to play baseball there and had great success, especially my first year was All Missouri Valley Conference shortstop. And then the second year was voted captain of the team, which was the first time in the school's history that a junior college player would come in and actually get voted on to be the captain of the team. So our team was actually ranked 25th in the nation my senior year. So we were very successful that year.
Yeah. Did you have any Major League Baseball teams scouting you?
I did. Actually, we had, because we were very good, 6 players off our team were drafted into professional baseball. And I was not one of them because I had a bad start to my senior year. So at that moment in time, my identity was in my athletics and my athletic success. And the minute that was over, I felt extremely lost.
Paul was so devastated by his inability to get a job in professional athletics that he turned to alcohol to cope. He became an addict, an alcoholic, a drug addict. He had 4 DUIs that eventually got him imprisoned. Paul suffered 6 months in jail. When he got out of jail, he was in utter despair. Here he was, a 33-year-old man living with his parents. He had no job, no driver's license. In this point of humility, he reached out to a friend. I want to share Paul sharing this story. I feel so bad that I laughed so hard, but it is a remarkable story that Paul too can laugh at as God brought him down to the lowest of low.
Kind of my mentor, sponsor, was really pushing me to get a real job, not caddying.
Right.
Because caddying, you show up when you want. Yeah. And he was like, no, you need like a real job where you show up and you work 8 hours.
Right.
Now it's November, beginning of November. And so I'm going store to store and nobody is looking, hiring me. So I go to Marshall Fields.
Yeah.
I walk in, I go to HR department, I talk to the lady, she's like, I'm really sorry. We don't have anything. And I'm walking out and she goes, wait a second, hang on just a second. I think we may have something. So I come back in, she puts a box on the table and she starts pulling out some items that are a uniform, and it's an elf. So I'm listening to my friend's voice saying, don't eat them all. This is the last store. And I'm like, I'll take it. This is Bloomingdale, where I grew up. And people are coming in and seeing me in my elf suit and saying, I thought you were a golf pro. And I'm like, I'm an elf.
Oh, Paul, that is priceless.
So in 1996, for that Christmas season, I was an elf at Marshall Fields.
Oh, my goodness.
And I was so good at being an elf that they kept me on. You know, I was Christmas help, and they were like, you were so good that we're going to keep you on as a full-time employee.
You know, God brings us down so that we will grow humble and see our need for him so he can lift us up. And that's exactly what happened with Paul.
So I called the guy that came to visit me in jail, who now I knew was going to AA, but I didn't know he was a Christ follower. So I called him, and he took me to dinner at the Seven Dwarves in Wheaton, and we talked for a couple hours, brought me back to my parents' house, which is where I was staying, and I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, I have a solution for you. I'm like, bring it on. You go in your bedroom, you shut the door, you get on your knees, and you ask Jesus for help. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I did exactly as he suggested. Got out, said hi to my parents, went in my room, got on my knees, looked up, said, Jesus, help me, not knowing him. Hopped up into my bed, and something physically happened in me. And I knew that things were going to be different. I try to move out of that posture, and quickly the Lord reminds me of my dependence on him and will remind me of the moment that he rescued me. And at that moment always brings me to a place of humility and a posture that brings me to my knees. Then I remember his power if I have a humble posture. You know, in my weakness, his strength is perfected. And if I stay there, I'm in great shape. If I move out of that, I'm in trouble.